Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First, of course, I would like to thank Professor Sinanovich for his kind introduction, and I would like also to thank the IIIT for their invitation, for inviting us, and for giving us the opportunity to share with you some views about the current developments in Egypt and their implications on democracy in general and on the Islamic movements in particular. As you can imagine, over the past few days we have been giving talks, Professor Dalia and I, about the or providing micro analysis of the events in Egypt, and also about what the future can hold for the country. What I would like to do today is to really take this opportunity and share with you some views or my opinions about the state of the Islamic movement in Egypt and how it handled the crisis and the transition period. And I understand, of course, that what I'm going to say will raise a lot of controversy, but I believe that if we would like to move ahead, we have to at least contemplate about what went on or went wrong, and also to see what kind of lessons that we can draw from that experience in order to build a democratic future. The framework from which I'm going to start is actually seeks to achieve two objectives. One, of course, is to restore if you wish, the revolutionary moment that Egypt had experienced in January 25th, the revolution of January 25th, which was, of course, based on a broad coalition, a unified political spectrum, and also a great hope and dream for the country to embark on a democratic future. The second objective, or the second framework, is to restore the civilian control over the democratic process. So this is where my points of departure is. So you can take whatever I'm going to say in terms of trying to analyze the challenges that the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamists faced in Egypt, just based within that framework. What I'm going to say could be easily dismissed by two facts. One is, or by two assumptions. One, of course, is that the reason behind the failure of the Muslim Brotherhood or the fall of the Muslim Brotherhood actually was not their mistakes, any mistakes that they committed, but was the state that they had to confront, and their inability to either understand or deal with that state, to overpower that state, to overcome that state. So that could dismiss whatever I'm going to say. The second assumption also that can dismiss whatever I say is actually the Muslim Brotherhood's biggest mistake is that they believed that they were operating in a true democracy, that they can follow elections, they can play by the rules. They also placed a lot of trust on the revolutionary moment and the revolutionary zeal, as well as in the institutions of the state, particularly the military and the Ministry of Interior. So these can, if you wish, refute all what I'm going to say. That's not an issue of mishandling or inability to deal with certain challenges, but it's mainly these structural issues that are inherent within the Egyptian political spectrum and the Egyptian polity in general, the dynamics between the state and society and so on. However, having said that, we still also need to address some of the challenges or issues that I believe the Muslim Brothers have not been able or were not able to deal with. I'm going to focus on four major elements. One, of course, is the state. The second is the model of governance. The third is the approach to change. And finally, policy-making process itself. Now, let me also place these within a general assumption or perception among Egyptians, which is the timing, the timeline in which the Muslim Brotherhood came to power. This is a time that they came to power after a revolutionary process that overthrew the head of a state and tried to change the whole regime. So they came after a revolutionary moment, but through democratic processes. The organization itself has been always perceived as a reformist organization, a gradualist one, that's supposed to lead or spearhead revolutionary change. That, of course, created some kind of a rift, some kind of mistrust, some kind of suspicion between that organization and whatever steps the organization took and the rest of the revolutionary forces. I will explain and detail this, of course. The second, also general challenge, was the onus on the Muslim Brotherhood from day one to prove its ability to transform itself from a mainstream Islamic movement into a mainstream nationalist Egyptian movement. I'm going to explain, of course, as we speak, issues about the relationship between the president himself and the group, the Jama'ah, the president and the guidance bureau, the president and the party. Also, the media did not spare any opportunity but to shed light on the treacherous nature of the movement, the non or un-Egyptianness of the movement. They were selling the country, and so on and so forth. The third issue, of course, was the tremendous task that they had to face in terms of addressing compounded problems, all simultaneously, all at the same time. Economic deterioration, the issue of the collapse of law and order, disobedient state apparatus, elements of the old regime that are still lying behind and just waiting to jump on the revolution. All these elements, the suspicious revolutionary forces, so they had to deal with a really compounded problems at the same time, the restructuring of the state, the increasing scale of demands day after day, from an inability, of course, the group itself to control the state apparatus in order to be able to deliver and address all these demands. Now I'm going to deal with the four, but this is the, if you wish, the overview of the environment in which the movement was trying to handle the situation in Egypt. I'll start addressing the first challenge, the state. This, of course, has been a surprise to many. If you look at the literature of the Islamist and Islamic ideologues, and especially the activist movements, the state has always been, if you wish, the vehicle or the grand prize through which the Sharia, the Islamic frameworks could be implemented. For years, there has been talk and literature produced about الدولة الإسلامية, الإسلام دين ودولة, the Islamic constitution, several versions. But it appeared, of course, that the state itself as a concept, as a dynamic, as a structure, has not been understood properly and adequately. Meaning the dynamics of the state itself, how to run a state, how to manage a state. In other words, how to transform the politics, the ideologies into policies, concrete policies of how the state can deliver, can issue, can make certain measures and policies that can address immediate and imminent problems. The other, of course, discovery was that despite the attempt to build an Islamic state, the Islamic project for a state has not been ready. And I think a good case in point that also helped in undermining the Muslim Brotherhood from the beginning, after they took over power, is the concept of Mashru' al-Nahda. Mashru' al-Nahda that became a source for ridicule for many Egyptians. It was not ready, despite the fact that this is a group that has been struggling for 80 years to establish an Islamic state and to fulfill an Islamic project. That, of course, started to shed light about the readiness and of the Islamists to really actually transform their ideas, political vision into concrete policies. The second issue that relates to the state, there are so many, by the way, that relate to the Egyptian state and so on, but I'm just trying to stay within the time frame. The second issue, of course, was the way the Muslim Brotherhood also tried to engage in the debate about the state itself. Specifically, the issue of what kind of state that they are advocating. If you remember the big debate about a state, a civic state, دولة مدنية, or a religious state, دولة دينية, or a civic state with religious reference, دولة مدنية بمرجعية دينية, or a civic state with an Islamic reference, دولة دينية بمرجعية إسلامية. All this, of course, enabled opponents to draw the Islamists into a debate that's extremely useless and futile. Political scientists know if you take any book, any textbook about political theory, go to the index and check civil state or civic state, you will never see it. It doesn't exist. That concept does not exist. Civic society exists, state exists, but civic state, that's a new combination, unfortunately, that of course was hiding some kind of I don't want to say a hidden understanding or hidden agenda, but of course for the Islamists it meant an Islamic state, and for the secularists it meant a secular state. So there were here competing identities, competing ideologies, and unlike the case in Tunisia, of course, things started to move from how to manage the state affairs into identity wars that helped in polarizing the country. The second challenge was, of course, the model of governance. One of the problems of the Egyptian revolution of January 25th is that it came without a political vision or a political framework of how to translate this vision into, again, policies and into functioning structures, new, revolutionary, functioning structures. And I think the Muslim Brotherhood also were part of this shortcoming, even in the way they started to present the vision about in the constitution about what kind of system they're trying to advocate. Is it a parliamentary system? Is it a presidential system? Or a mix between the two? Unfortunately, given of course this, I don't know where we got it from, but this deep French legacy, we opted for a mixed system, parliamentary, presidential, tilting toward more of the parliamentary in the first constitution. Despite the fact that many of Muslim Brotherhood leadership expressed their actually preference of a parliamentary system. In a country that's, its political culture is predominantly presidential. We love the pharaoh, and if we don't have one, we make one. يعني the Egyptian saying always goes, اللي ملوش كبير يشتري له كبير. If you don't have a boss, go and buy a boss. You can be your own boss. Anyway, so that of course needed to be clarified. The other thing is the legacy also of Islamic governance in general in the 20th century, and what kind of model it could provide the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Actually, we have a number of models. I will go very quickly over them. We have the Iranian model, we have the Sudanese model, we have the Iraqi and Afghani model, foreign invasion putting a democratic system or whatever is quasi or fragmented. You have the Somali model, you have the Turkish, Malaysian, Indonesian, Hamas, and Maghreb, and Morocco, of course. So we have different models of Islamic governance and government, but generally speaking, in Egypt, two models, which did not compete, but at least were very prominent. For the mainstream Islamists, including the Muslim Brotherhood and of course the Nahda in Tunisia, the most influential model was Turkish one. Turkish one. Pluralistic, democratic to some extent, and neoliberal in economic orientation. It's export-led growth, export-oriented economy, integration into the free market economy, and this is fine. So this is one model. This is a fine model, but you have to take into consideration again the revolutionary moment in which you are trying to build this model. A revolution that actually, whether it's good or bad, that was really advocating redistribution as opposed to accumulation of wealth. The neoliberal model has to be based on accumulation and not redistribution. That again created a lot of tension. حد الأقصى الأجور, minimum wage, maximum wage, all this, the demands, sectorial demands, and so on and so forth. That was one model. The second model, of course, that was very appealing to the left of center Islamists was the Brazilian model. Direct participatory democracy, distributional as well. So again, and most of the revolutionaries, Masr al-Qawiyya, Strong Egypt, Tayar al-Masri, and so on, they were advocating this model. So you also see some kind of friction even within the Islamists, mainstream Islamists, on the type of economic and political model that the country should see. So I'm moving very quickly, so forgive me because I already have only 10 minutes or so. The third challenge, of course, was the approach to change. And this, I think, was the biggest challenge, because the perception of the Muslim Brotherhood by others and of themselves is that it is a reformist and not revolutionary group. If you ask leading members now about the mistakes that were made, some would tell you very explicitly that one of the biggest mistakes is that the movement missed the opportunity to rejoin the revolutionary forces and the revolutionary moment when there was a need actually to quit or to relinquish this gradualist, reformist approach from within and try to side with the revolution. And specifically, they will tell you two historic moments where this rejoining, revision, if you wish, should have happened. One was the Tahrir moment, when President Morsi gave the pledge in the Tahrir Square. I was there, and I can see, and I can attest to the feeling of really a moment of possibility of uniting Egyptians once again and moving with this revolution forward. So that was a clear moment that whatever mistakes that were made could have been redressed. And the second moment, of course, was in August 2012. A month after, exactly, when July and then August 2012, when President Morsi removed Tantawi and Anad, and this seemed to be the ability to exercise, because everybody wondered how did he do it, and how did he let him to do this. So that was a moment when there was again a feeling that a civilian control over, call it the armed forces, the democratic process, could be achieved and could be attained. So these were two historic moments when it comes to the approach to change. What we saw was, again, a deliberate decision to count on the ability of the state apparatus to cooperate with the Muslim Brotherhood, with the head of the state, and to move on with the reforms from within, maybe to restructure, to reform, but from within the state apparatus itself. I'm not going to say the reasons behind this. Maybe it's the original or the initial nature of the approach to change within the group itself. That's always gradualist. It's not non-confrontationist. It relies on the individual. If you remember, individual, the family, society, the state. So it has maybe so many reasons, or maybe they saw something that most of us have not seen, that this state cannot be you cannot really confront it head on, so you have to give it assurances, and maybe you can bet on reforming it from within. The outcome, of course, we know that was, of course, created a major rift between the Muslim Brotherhood on the one side and the forces of change on the other side. Another issue, of course, was the issue of the transition. How to lead the transition, how to manage the transition itself. And I think the video clip that we saw really summarizes the one good, proper approach in terms of stating your objectives, stating your priorities, and he stated very clearly. Our priority was not to make the transitional process fail, to protect democracy, even at the expense of ruling and so on. But what was more important, or what was very significant in the case of the Muslim Brotherhood, was the lack of clarity on the entity of the group itself, entity of the actor itself within that transition. Because I understand, I teach democratic transitions and everything, I understand there's no rules, very few rules. Yeah, with all this huge, massive literature on democratization, there are 4 or 5 rules. Only 5 rules that can come up to really like theory, facts. These are facts. Only 4 or 5. The rest are usually speculations, best practices, suggestions, proposals. But one thing, of course, that had to be made very clear was the issue of how the nature of the group itself within that transition. Within that transition, there was a lot of ambiguity about the relationship between the president, the general bureau or the guiding bureau, Maktab al-Irshad, the group in general, the party, and that, of course, again opened the huge door for speculation and also undermining the whole thing. Finally, or maybe it's before the last, is the policy making process itself. I mentioned earlier that one major problem was, of course, the issue of transforming the politics, the discourse, the narrative, into concrete policies that address the immediate problems. Another thing that should have happened was that most of the intellectual attention, if you wish, was placed on Mashru' al-Nahda, which they managed, the opponents of the Muslim Brotherhood managed really to undermine and ridicule, as I said, from the beginning, because there was nothing there. There was nothing there ready to implement, or even parts of whatever was available could have been implemented. It doesn't mean that they were not trying to really address policies and so on. They tried, but not in a kind of a concrete vision or an overall vision and framework. So at the intellectual level, I think there was a challenge, and most Islamists face this challenge. We said how to transform the narrative into policies, and also how to project now the Sharia, which many call for its implementation, into also concrete policies, that pertain to human beings, to development, to economic growth, to political stability, to human rights. And I just will spend 1 minute because this is very important. So the idea how to transform the Sharia into policies, concrete policies. Of course, I feel that there was some effort should have been given to this, because that would have at least transformed the intellectual discourse, the intellectual makeup of the group itself, not only in Egypt, but maybe also in other Islamic countries. And of course, people talk about 2 approaches to this. What do they call al-manhaj al-maqasidi or al-manhaj al-qiyami, the values of the Sharia, the ultimate goals or objectives of the Sharia as values or as objectives. And how can you do this? And I always give my students this example. When I tell them hifz al-nafs is one of the hifz al-nafs. Hifz al-nafs is one of the objectives of the Sharia. Maybe one of the in terms of priority, because the nafs, everything will be established within nafs, the safety of the human being and so on. So I tell them, what's usually the example that comes to mind? So the classic response or the standard response is what? When you are in the desert or when you are hungry and you are about to starve and die, you can eat pig, right? Pork. The hifz al-nafs. Or you are in the desert and you are thirsty, so you can drink alcohol. That's hifz al-nafs. So I said, what if we take it a step further? Hifz al-nafs means protecting the soul from any inhumane treatment, upholding human rights, abolishing and ending torture. That's hifz al-nafs. And nafs, everything that pertains to the dignity of the human being, that's hifz al-nafs. Can we translate that into policies? So instead of just drink alcohol, if there is a necessity, we move from that into how can we uphold the dignity, karamat al-insan, as the Quran have advocated. This is one example. Hifz al-nasl, the same thing. What's hifz al-nasl? That we have to bring, procreate in order to fill the earth with kids and so on. Fine, good. But hifz al-nasl is also what? Human development indicators. So how can we translate? This is what I mean by policy. The other challenge, of course, that where there was a lot of difficulty addressing was, of course, the issue of immediate justice in the Egyptian society after coming to power. The issue of the martyrs, the issue of the casualties of the revolution, the issue of qasas, transitional justice, the snipers that killed many Egyptians, nobody found out. Who were they? Where are they? And they keep emerging and re-emerging and re-emerging and so on. And in line of that, yani, there came time, of course, that things started to move from not even running after them, but even praising the perpetrators, that they are in the heart, deep in our heart, and they are the actors or the leaders of the second crossing and stuff like that. The issue of social justice, the issue of corruption, and the issue of inclusiveness. I know firsthand there were efforts made at inclusiveness, but maybe not enough. I think Sheikh Rashid Ghannouchi and his presence in the Tunisian, two things. I think his presence and also the absence of a strong military enabled Tunisia to achieve these things. But I know that he also put a lot of effort in bringing everyone together and upholding inclusiveness. I will finish very quickly. I try to conclude. The issue of restructuring the state, that was also a major challenge when it comes to the transition. One condition or achievement or objective of any revolution is to dismantle the structures of authoritarianism and build new ones, which is not taking place. And in the end, of course, the old ones were able to make a comeback and devour the revolutionaries itself. There was also a phrase that we kept pressing: empowerment of the revolution, empowerment of the revolution, empowerment of the revolution, تمكين الثورة, تمكين الثورة, تمكين الثورة, because this was the key to transitional justice. You cannot try to implement transitional justice without the revolution in place, in power. Because if you try, this is exactly what the judiciary will do for you. Actually, any step that you will take, any case that will come before them, they will turn it against you, and this is exactly what happened. And we talked about this early on. There will come a time when Mubarak will be out of jail, and the revolutions will be in jail. We knew that early on. We knew that early on. Because this is, again, revolutions in the social sciences, wars and revolutions, really are two fields where there is a lot of good literature and room for predictability. Achieving also there were so many things, the balance between the state and society. This was another thing. We always wanted to achieve a strong state and a strong society as well. Anyway, so let me conclude, because I know I took a lot of time. The policy making process in terms of getting people communication, getting people ready for that policy, deliberating the policy before it's taken. And I think a good case in point was the Constitution declaration that most the anti-Morsi elements take as an example of his attempt to become a new pharaoh and this and this and that, even without people knowing the real content of that declaration. But I think the biggest mistake was not in the declaration per se, giving, of course, that one or two items, clauses, should have been phrased better and so on. But the problem was in the lack of communication. Lack of communication behind this. Anyway, the way to move forward, for the Islamists and I think there are at least a number of things, and this is very controversial. And I know this might not be the place or the time to do it, but at least there are at least two or three steps that should be taken. One, of course, is self-assessment. Self-assessment from the group itself, to reflect on what happened, what could have been done better, whether there were clear mistakes that were made, and how can we avoid them. I know this would sound academic and theoretical, but we have a list of concrete events and encounters that still need to be reviewed very thoroughly, and some kind of, honestly, a statement of clarification has to be produced and has to come out. One, of course, is the insistence in adopting the reform approach and creating a modus vivendi with oppressive apparatus in the state. The second one, of course, the incident of Muhammad Mahmoud and Majlis Wazara. And the significance is this is not in the choice, because I understand you can make a decision. My decision, I'm not going to escalate. I'm not going to confront the state apparatus and the military and they crush me at some point. But the issue or the significance of Muhammad Mahmoud and Majlis al-Wazara lies in one thing, that this, at least from the revolutionary perspective, this was the moment that there was some kind of a will to dismantle the oppressive apparatus of the state. Maybe symbolically, because the whole tactic was to move to the Ministry of Interior and try to purify, to restructure that ministry. And of course the rift happened. The deal or the agreement of Fairmont Hotel, that was another moment, and other things. So self-assessment is needed. The second thing, of course, is accountability. There were decisions that were made. Some of these decisions, of course, were not correct. So there must be some accountability. We cannot always go business as usual. It's not a dictatorship. Like, the autocrat makes wrong decision and he moves on and on and on. It cannot happen this way. The third, also the decision, and this is my view, with regard to two possibilities. The really a serious consideration of separating Al-Jama'ah from the political party, in order to have really clear demarcations and lines of accountability. And also, that will be an excellent protection. We can talk about this, protection for the group itself. Some people even go as far as saying, if the Muslim Brotherhood would like to have a fresh start, they should freeze the party at least for 5 to 10 years and focus on education and on other things and participate in politics independently. This is just an idea. This is just an idea, and the reason is everybody now does not trust the group. They think they made promises so many times and they broke these promises. So this is an indication. I don't want to go that far. I mean, like, separation is fine, but to dissolve themselves, the party itself. But this is actually the tool by which they can compete elections. So this is a proof that they have no intention of seriously competing elections for 5 or 10 years to come. Finally, I would say that I think it's about time that the Islamic movement, not only the Muslim Brotherhood, think in terms of their capability, actual capability and capacity. They should not assume or propagate for projects that are larger, like they are national, mega projects, that no single group or institution is able to really handle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.